Recording in progress.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and give us until about like 2:01, 2:02, so that anyone who wants to join has a chance to join before we go ahead and start. So, like I said, if you're just joining now, I'm gonna go ahead and get started at like 2:01, 2:02 time frame. Okay, I see a couple more people trickling in, but my first few slides are overview slides and welcome slides anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I also hope that everyone can hear me okay. I've been having issues with my mic recently, so I mean, if you couldn't hear me, this wouldn't be very helpful to say, but if you can hear me, if someone, just one person could say in the chat that they like do hear me, that would be awesome. Okay. Thanks, Sierra. You're the best. And thank you to everyone else who's saying that you hear me. You guys are awesome. Okay. Okay. So, like I said, looks like one or two more people are kind of trickling in. But like I said a couple seconds ago, first few slides are just introduction and overview slides. So we'll have some time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on mastering your quantitative methodology. So my name is Kai, and I am a quantitative consultant here at Statistics Solutions. And so what this means is that I help clients who with their quantitative methodology and results. I also often help clients prepare their defense presentations and proposal presentations. And I also help with, survey uploads, PowerPoint slides, all that fun stuff. This webinar will be recorded, as Sierra said in the chat, but you will be able to look back at it at any time, and you should receive an email about 24 to 48 hours after this session to access the Zoom recording. If I can get the slides to change, I would maybe go, oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Statistics Solutions, our company. I also am going to have this information at the very end. So if you are interested in what I'm about to talk about, all of this information will be on the last slide as well. And I'll give you guys a second to be able to write that down at the end. But before we get into the quantitative methodology, I really just wanted to talk about our company. So Statistics Solutions, we are a full service dissertation consulting company, and we help grad students and research professionals with editorial support for your dissertations and scholarly projects. So we help with every aspect of the research process, whether that's chapter 1, your introduction, chapter 2, your literature review, your methodology, which is what this PowerPoint is about. We also help with the results and presenting your results. We also do survey uploads and helping you, find validated instruments. We help you with, literature reviews and all that fun stuff. So really, we do everything under the sun when it comes to a research project. So if you are interested in working with us, we do have complimentary 30-minute consultations. So those are free consultations on Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I do have a website link up on the screen, but I also have an email link that you can email and a phone number to call if you are interested in working with us. Like I said, I'm going to have this at the very end of these slides too, so I'm not going to spend too long on this slide. And if you are interested in using, the link or the email or anything, and you didn't have a chance to write it down, it will be at the end again. Okay, so just as a quick overview of what we're going to be going over today. First, we are going to talk about the purpose of the methodology chapter and why it is so important. Then we're going to go through each section of a methodology chapter and discuss the specific aspects of each section. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the introduction, the research design, population and sample, instrumentation, data collection procedures, data analysis plan, any limitations that you may have, and then finally, any ethical considerations for your data. And then finally, at the end, I'm going to give some time for questions. And I meant to say that a little bit earlier as well. I am going to wait for questions till the end. So if you do have questions along the way, that's awesome. There should be a Q&A section on Zoom that you should be able to put your questions in, or you could just put them in on the chat. I will get to them when I get to that slide down at the end. Okay, so first things first, what is the purpose of your methodology chapter? Oops, sorry, y'all. I just got a pop-up somehow, and I just wanted to make sure that went away. I wasn't sure if you could see it or not. Probably not, but just wanted to make sure. Anyway, so first things first, like I said, what is the purpose of your methodology chapter? The methodology chapter is perhaps the most important part of a dissertation section, of a dissertation, because it sets the stage for the procedures, steps, and tests that you will use throughout the rest of your paper. It's important to be thorough and exact about what instruments you will use, the target population of interest, and how you intend to recruit them, and any appropriate data analysis method. If the methodology is done incorrectly, then the results of the dissertation may not be accurate. Therefore, your methodology should be detailed enough that anyone can read through and recreate exactly what it says and replicate your study. So specifically, I like to think of a methodology as a recipe. This is something that I talk about a lot, so bear with me. I'm sure everyone here has an old family recipe for something like chocolate chip cookies or just cookies in general, right? And when you think about a cookie recipe, what are you thinking of? Are you thinking about adding, 2 cups of flour and 1 stick of butter? Are we thinking about, setting the oven to 150 or 350 degrees? So recipes are effective because they convey exactly what ingredients you need, how to combine them, and what temperature to set the oven to, and how long to bake them for. If you follow each step of the recipe exactly, you should come out with a perfect chocolate chip cookie every single time. Well, what if we thought of your study as this chocolate chip cookie recipe? Each step of your methodology is the next ingredient or the next step needed to bake the cookie. So you want to imagine your variables and instruments as maybe your ingredients. So then you want to clearly define what those variables are, aka what your ingredients are, and then how you plan to measure them. So aka 2 cups of butter, or maybe more realistically in a study section that, you are looking at the variable of stress. Okay, well, how are you going to measure stress, right? Then you're going to think about your population as the process of combining those ingredients together. So you're going to discuss the population of interest and then how you plan to recruit them. And then finally, treat your data collection method as the oven temperatures and the baking times. Describe the method in which you plan to obtain and analyze your data, and then the population size needed to detect that effect. The reason that I bring all of this up is when you go to make your family's famous or, family's traditional cookie recipe, you should be able to read off of the recipe card exactly. And in the end, you should end up with cookies that more or less taste like your mom's home cooking. This is not something that I specialize in. Every time I try to make cookies, it tastes nothing like my mom's, and I have no idea what I do wrong. Not the point. Maybe I'm just bad at baking. But the same is really true for your methodology. Any other researcher who is not you and who is not connected to your project should be able to pick up your methodology and be able to replicate exactly what you did to get the results that you got. So that is really ultimately the purpose of your methodology. We want to make sure it's like a very detailed instruction manual or very detailed recipe that we want to use. And so, the methodology chapter is going to describe how you're conducting your research and why you're conducting your research. So it should be detailed enough that it should be replicated by others. But ultimately, most schools do have guidelines and specific requirements of what needs to be in the methodology chapter. So even if you do treat it like a recipe or an instruction manual, you should always be using your school's guidelines to kind of determine which section you're going to put each ingredient, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, into the actual chapter, if that makes any sense. Okay, sorry about that. I'm having a hard time changing the slides for some reason. So I think my computer's just slow. So the first aspect of your methodology is your introduction. And so this should be about a paragraph in length, usually no longer than 1 page if it's going to be a long introduction, right? And so in this paragraph, you should restate the purpose of your experiment. So why exactly are we making these cookies? Do you have an event that you need to go to where you want to bring the cookies to? Sorry, this is a really bad analogy that I'm going to continue out throughout. But it is important to restate your purpose. So first 1 or 2 sentences should be restating the purpose, the problem statement. Next, you should also restate any research questions and hypotheses that you talked about in previous chapters. And then finally, you're going to briefly review what is going to be discussed in the chapter. So a couple sentences that say something along the line of, in this chapter, we will discuss any variables of interest, how we plan to measure them, as well as recruitment of population, so on and so forth, right? So just a couple sentences where you're really briefly talking about what the rest of the chapter is going to entail. Next is going to be your research design section. And so in this section, you're going to state the type of research design that you have selected or that you want to use for your study. So is this an experimental study in which we are manipulating variables, manipulating a stress group and a control group, an experimental group and a control group? Or are, we using more of a quasi-experimental design where instead of manipulating groups, we're using something like pre-existing groups? So a good example of a quasi-experimental design is if, you're interested in looking at something, but what you're really interested in looking at is the difference between 2 really distinct groups. So, maybe one is like men, and the other is people who identify as men and people who identify as women, right? We're looking at 2 very distinct groups here. And ultimately, it's not like we can just shove people into one group or the other. You can't take a random sample and go, okay, well, you're actually going to be a man today and you're going to be a woman. So, and then just be like, and these people are going to be non-binary, right? And so with these distinct groups, quasi-experimental designs are really helpful for designs where you can't randomly select people into those groups. It would be highly unethical to try to tell people what their gender is, and try to randomly select them into that gender. Same thing goes for things like what's a better example or a different example? Mental health, right? It would be kind of unethical to say, oh, well, I'm looking at a depressed population versus a control population, but I'm going to randomly assign these variables. So this random person who may or may not be depressed, you're going to be in the depressed category now. So in situations like that, where you have, these distinct groups where people really can't change what group they're in, aka pre-existing groups, something like a quasi-experimental design is going to be a little bit more helpful. I really went into quasi-experimental designs there, but there are other designs. There's a non-experimental design, which means that, we're not manipulating any variables. There's correlational designs, very similar to non-experimental. And then there's causal comparative. Yeah. And basically, once you state what design you have selected, then you need to justify why you have selected that design. So explain why this design was selected. Is there something specific about your population, like in a quasi-experimental design, where you're not able to randomly select people into an experimental group and a control group? Also, you want to spend another couple sentences explaining why other designs were not selected. So if you chose a quasi-experimental design, why didn't you choose an experimental design? Or say you chose an experimental design, why isn't it a causal comparative design? And so this whole paragraph, or this whole section, should really be about the why of what design you've chosen. You really should be able to, validate why you've chosen this design. So once you've set the stage for why we are running this study, we now have to talk about how we are planning to run this study. And so specifically, the first thing that you're going to talk about is the population, or who are we planning on studying in particular. So in this section, you're going to discuss the population of interest for your study. So describe the population and specifically why you chose them. So for example, if you're looking at maybe differences in math scores between two classrooms of students, and your population of interest may then be, school children in 7th and 8th grade, because when they're at that age, they're at a developmental milestone for math. And so, the population of interest is going to be really heavily specified based on, previous literature, who have other studies that are similar to yours, who have they looked at as their population? If you're doing something with mental health, is your population a group of clinically depressed people? Are we looking at people who are, have clinical anxiety, stuff like that, right? And then why? You want to explain why you're choosing this specific group, and then describe any characteristics of the population that may provide, helpful information on who you're collecting. And then you're also going to want to provide a sample size, which is done using a power analysis. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Or sorry, this is about your population size. Sample size is the next slide. Population size. So say you're looking at a group of students. Okay, well, you might not sample every single student that's in that school, but you will put the population size of, okay, well, at this school, there are 1,500 students, which is a lot of students to have at a school, but it's a general concept. Once you have determined your population of interest, you're then going to discuss how you plan to obtain a sample of these people. So a sample is a smaller group of people chosen from a larger population to then represent that population. So in this section, you're going to describe your sampling technique. Are you using a random sample so that anyone in your population has a chance to participate? Or are we using convenience sampling, such as the two classrooms in a school that you teach as your pre-existing experimental group and a control group? Additionally, you're going to describe how you plan to recruit and obtain data from these people. So are you using surveys? Are you going to post those surveys online? Or are you going to post posters around your campus for interested people to sign up? So you need to be specific about how you will be recruiting these people. And then finally, like I was saying a little bit earlier, I think I got mixed up. This section, you're going to talk about a power analysis to determine the minimum number of people needed in your sample. So this is known as a sample size, and a power analysis is going to give you the minimum amount of people to detect an effect if one exists within the population. And power analyses are usually based off of the type of data that you have and the type of analysis that you want to run. So I'm going to get into that a little bit later as well. Next, you're going to want to identify your instruments, or how do you plan to measure each of your variables? So you should use this section to describe both your variables and your instrumentation in detail. Firstly, you should describe the instrument being used and which variable or variables in the study it's measuring. Within this section, you should discuss how many questions or items are in each instrument or survey, and how you would go about scoring those responses. If you need to create any composite scores for your variables, sorry, I need to take a sip of water real quick. I just have something in the back of my throat. So sorry about that. If you need to create any composite scores for your variables, you should describe that in this section and describe exactly how those composite scores are going to be done. So are there going to be any, reverse coding? Are we going to be changing, all of the yeses to zeros, all of the nos to ones? Actually, flip that around. Nos would be zeros and yes would be ones. So are we doing any additional coding or additional scoring and scaling in any way like that? You're going to want to describe that in detail. Additionally, you should also provide any reliability and validity information for the instrument to prove that it is a validated instrument by statistical standards. Reliability and validity should be presented in the form of a factor analysis. And for validity is going to be a factor analysis, and then reliability is going to be a Cronbach's alpha coefficient. And then any survey or instrumentation you're using should already have this information embedded within it. If it's a validated survey, at the very least. If it's something that other people have used before, they should have that kind of information. So finally, once we've gotten all of the variables operationalized and the population and sample determined, it's time to start kind of putting all of those ingredients together. Yeah, we've got all the ingredients, and now it's really time to just start mixing it up. And so in our case, that actually just means describing the data collection procedures. So this is the step that's going to feel the most like a recipe, because you're going to describe step by step what your participants will be expected to do. This means that you should be discussing the where and the how of data collection. So where is it going to take place and how is it going to take place? So therefore, you should be stating if the experiment will be online or in person, approximately what would be expected of the participants, and how long you expect each step to take. This is also the section that you will describe your experimental and your control group, if you have one, and what each individual group will be asked to do. Finally, you should state how you plan to gain consent from participants and if they will receive any compensation for their participation, sorry. So a lot of people find that for this section, graphics can be really helpful. So if you're able to come up with some sort of graphical representation of what the participants will be asked to do, if that's a timeline of some sort, or, people can do really fun things with PowerPoint slides. So, making, a slide that kind of shows step by step each section that a participant is going to have to go through in your experiment. That can be really helpful for these kind of sections. Okay, so now that you've discussed exactly what your participants will be expected to do, you should now discuss how you plan to analyze the data and the responses that you're going to get from those participants. So first, you should state the program that you plan to run the data in, such as SPSS or JASP or RStudio or our program, which is Intellectus Statistics, which is a program that we've created through this company to help people with data analysis. Yeah, so talk about SPSS or any software that you use for data. And then you're going to describe how you plan to clean or prepare the data for analysis. So this will include cleaning for missing data and outliers. It will also include creating composite scores for variables of interest. Then you're going to describe the statistical analysis that you plan to use. So which analysis you should use is based off of your research questions. So if you're looking for something like differences between an experimental and a control group, then you might use a t-test or an ANOVA. While if you're looking for relationships between variables, you might use something like a correlation or a regression. So once you've determined the appropriate statistical test based on your research question, you should then describe exactly how this analysis is going to be run and why it is appropriate for your research question. So this is going to include the type of statistical test, such as an F-test or a t-test, and any assumptions or tests that you have to run before the final test that needs to be tested before the analysis can be run. Second to last is going to be your limitations section. And so in this section, you're going to list any limitations of your research design. So if you have something like a correlational study, then you're going to talk about how you can't determine cause and effect because it's correlational. If you have a, quasi-experimental design, you're going to talk about how you couldn't randomly assign people into groups. And so therefore, it's not a true experimental design, right? For something like an experimental design, a lot of the time experimental designs have really low external validity because they're very highly manipulated in a laboratory setting. And sometimes those scenarios just don't actually exist in real life, or at least not often. And they're being manipulated instead in an experimental way. So it's not as generalizable to the rest of the population as a whole. Pre-post studies, they often have issues like attrition, which means you have people dropping off and not completing the post part of the study. There's also stuff called testing effects, which, you can get into a lot of that, but, testing effects is something along the lines of, oh, well, they've already seen this pre-test originally, and if there's not a lot of time between the pre and the post test and they're taking the exact same test 2 times, a testing effect might say that they're actually going to get better at the post test just because they've actually seen the pre-test 1 time. There's also history effects and maturation effects. History effects are stuff like COVID-19, and how that absolutely, in 2020, that affected a lot of people's studies. And so a lot of people added that into their limitation sections and just so on and so forth, right? So you're going to use this section to talk about what type of design you had and why that design might have limited the interpretation of your results. And every design has its pros and cons, right? So even if, like I said, you pick an experimental study, which is usually hailed as kind of the be all end all in research, if you do an experimental study, you're probably doing the most robust one, which is a good thing, right? But, the con to that is that you might have low external validity. So you're going to want to talk about that. So every section is going to have a limitation section because everyone in every research problem, there's always going to be something that you can do differently the next time. There's always going to be something that has some pros and cons to it. And it's just important to talk about those pros and cons. And then finally, this is the last section, other than a summary section at the end of all of your chapters, you should have some sort of summary to just summarize exactly what you've talked about. I don't have a slide for that, but it would come after the ethical consideration section. So the last real section that has meat and potatoes in it is going to be your ethical consideration. And so in this section, you're going to review the Belmont Report principles. So those are those 3 principles of, justice, beneficence, and respect for autonomy. I think those are the 3. No, I'm pretty sure those are the 3. And so you're going to discuss how you made sure that you stayed within those ethical considerations, those Belmont Report principles within your study. So you're going to talk about how participants are going to be able to provide informed consent. You're going to talk about how participants are going to be told that they will be able to, withdraw from any time, aka autonomy. You're going to talk about any risks involved in your study. So are you lying to your participants? Are you, giving them any sort of stressful experience that they might not normally experience in their day-to-day life? So talk about any risks that are involved, which kind of goes along with beneficients. Same with how are your participants' identities and information going to be protected? This goes along with confidentiality, which is under respect for persons and respect for autonomy within the Belmont reports. And so, are you going to de-identify your data? Make sure that their names are not identifiable by their information. You make sure that, their emails aren't able to look at their emails and then look at the information that you have in them and then be able to, make conclusions about who they are as people, or be able to identify who that person is just by their responses, right? So how are you going to make sure that that does not happen? And then finally, for confidentiality and privacy, you're going to talk about how your data is going to be stored. So are you going to destroy it after the study is over, or are you going to keep it in like a filing cabinet or a shared drive? And if you do keep it in a shared drive, are you going to make sure that, only people who are, privy to the information of the study, that only they have access to that information? Awesome. Okay. So I am going to open up the floor to questions now. I thought I had a slide for questions, but I must have accidentally deleted it before this presentation. So I am going to open up for questions, but I do have this information up again for, support for us as Statistics Solutions as a company. So if you are interested in working with us, I'm going to have this stuff up on the screen while I'm answering questions. So if you want to write it down and contact us, you're going to have the chance to write it down now. So let's see. Okay, so while explaining other designs that weren't chosen, how can I narrow down these designs? Yeah. Should I give reasons for all as to why I don't choose them while explaining why others were not chosen? Yeah, so that's a really great question. So you can kind of do it two ways, right? I see a lot of people who will do it kind of the way you're explaining, right? Well, they'll say, these are all the research designs possible. This is why I chose the one I chose. And then here's all the reasons that I didn't choose the other ones. So that's totally a way that you could do it. Another way that you could do it is actually to just kind of choose two research designs that seem really, or two or three, or just a couple or a handful of research designs that really, really fit what you want to do. And then you're going to talk about the one out of the other two or three that is just the most appropriate for your study, and then talk about the other two or three or the other handful as if those are the only other options you ever had. I hope that makes sense in terms of answering your question. But you do really have two ways of doing that. So let's see. Any other questions? Everyone's just saying thank you. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So when writing in these sections, do you write in the past tense? That is an amazing question. It depends. Which I know no one likes to hear that, right? So in terms of when you're writing your methodology, you're actually going to write it in two tenses depending on where you are in your dissertation. So if you are in the proposal section of your dissertation, meaning you have not collected any data yet, you are literally just trying to get approved for this and talk about and get on to the IRB and data collection, that's when you're going to write it in the present and future tense, because that's when you're denoting that you have not conducted this study yet, but you are planning on doing it. However, once you have had approval from your committee members, so once you are in the defense stage of your methodology, so at this stage, you have probably already collected your data and analyzed the results, and you're just defending to, a panel of committees, that's when you're going to write in the past tense. I hope that makes sense. And I can write it down in the chat as well, if that would help. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, we got a lot of other questions. Okay. So next question, please elaborate on qualitative instrument validations. Yeah, so I don't know too much about qualitative stuff, to be completely honest with y'all. I'm very much a quantitative person. However, we do have another webinar that is exactly like this, except for just for qualitative information. And that's done by my really good friend, Johanna. She works with me at this company and she's amazing. She mostly does all of the qualitative stuff. And she does that PowerPoint slides, and she's really good at it. So if you are interested in qualitative data analysis and qualitative methodology, that is definitely not in my wheelhouse, but it is in hers. Yeah, yes, thank you. Proposal done, working on data collection now. So yep, so then you're going to write all of that in the past tense for your dissertation chapters. Absolutely, Teresa, you got it. Awesome. Okay, looks like there's more questions in the Q&A as well. Yeah, so if you're assessing relationships between two variables, chi-squared or logistic, which is better? So it really just depends, right, on the type of variables that you have, right? If chi-squared is really looking for relationships, but you can also use a chi-squared chi-squared to look at differences as well. If you're looking at assessing relationships, a logistic regression is probably the way to go. If you're going between a chi-squared and a logistic, but don't take my word on that, just because it really does depend on the type of data that you have access to and your research question, which I don't know either of those things. So, but just kind of based on just regular general knowledge, a logistic regression is going to be best if you're wanting to assess relationships between like two or more variables. Yeah. Do you have a webinar on the different quantitative study designs? I believe we do, actually. I believe we have a webinar that goes really in depth into the differences between like the statistical tests that you can run. And I believe we also have a webinar that goes into choosing the methodology that's going to be best for you. I think the second one, the one I just talked about, like choosing the methodology that's going to be best for you, that one we have not presented yet, I do not believe. And I believe those are going to be future webinars that we're doing. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get through all these questions, y'all. You have great questions, though. Really think that you guys are asking good things. So if you're doing a Likert survey, how do you validate that instrument? Yeah, so if you've kind of created the Likert survey on your own, you are going to need to do something like a factor analysis. Correlations and factor analyses are kind of the biggest for validation. However, if it's a Likert survey that has already been done by other people, you shouldn't have to validate it yourself. They should have that information for you within the survey information. So a really good example is, if you're using a stress test, I don't know exact examples of stress tests, but say you're using a stress test, it should give you kind of all of the survey questions for that test. And then at the end, it should say something along the lines of, here is here's the reliability. We did a Chromebox alpha. This is what our reliability among our variables was. And then here's the validity as well. Is sample size relevant in a qualitative study? Yes, but you do it differently. That's about as much as I know. So in qualitative or quantitative design, sample size is incredibly important because it's based off of your research questions and the type of analysis that you're going to be running and the type of data that you have. And it's going to give you a minimum number of people that you need to detect a significant effect if one exists. Qualitative studies, on the other hand, sample size is relevant because you want to get a representative sample of the population that you're looking at. However, you're not going to run a power analysis. Instead, usually, from what I understand about qualitative studies, is that you look to previous literature to see what sample size they have done in the past for qualitative studies. And then moving forward, you would either say, in the past, they've, looked at 100 people. In my study, I'm going to look at more than that, or in my study, I'm going to look at also 100 people. So yes, sample size is relevant in qualitative studies, but like I said, it is done differently. And that's about as much as I know. Okay. I think that's all the questions. I'm trying to look through and make sure that I answered everyone who asked a question. So just give me 1 second. Kathleen, I love the comment that you made, if you're still in here, that the cookie baking is a wonderful analogy. I'm really glad that you think so. I did not make it up. I'm going to be honest. And when I was in grad school, that is what my mentor told me when I was really stuck with the quantitative methodology of my study. And she told me that it was like baking and it was like making a recipe. And for some reason, that just clicked in my brain. And I said, I know how to do a methodology now. So since I really like that analogy, I really like when other people also like that analogy as well. Okay, y'all. I don't see any more questions. I think that I got everyone's question. If I didn't, please let me know. But just to kind of cap out what I've been talking about, statistics solutions and who we are as a company, please do feel free to reach out if you want any sort of help with your methodology chapter, in the sense that with what we do as a company is you would send us your methodology chapter and say you were working with me specifically, you and I would have a phone conversation where we talk about what exactly areas of support you would actually need, where you want to add detail and all that fun stuff. And then I would take your draft and then I would kind of add comments and add sections of detail for you to be able to review. And then we would really go back and forth a couple times on making sure that we're finalizing your methodology exactly how you would like it. So that's how we do methodology chapters. That's also how we do chapter 1 and chapter 2 as well. We use your drafts and then we kind of edit your drafts and we work with you on the draft to make it a little bit stronger. With the results section, we actually will take your data, run the data ourselves. We'll give you all of the information on how we ran the data. And then we'll actually write up a result section for you that you can then edit into your own words. And then we'd have another conversation at some point to talk about the interpretation of those results together. And then discussion is the same way as the 1, 2, and 3, intro, literature review, and methodology. So we just take your draft and we edit it and we help you and we kind of hold your hand and walk you through the whole process together. So if you are interested in help or in working with us in any kind of sense for your dissertation or your scholarly project or your research project in any way, please feel free to reach out. Like I said, I have some information on the screen on how you can reach out. And we would love to work with y'all. So awesome. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for like 1 more minute. And then I'll go ahead and end this PowerPoint. Yeah, also thank you to everyone who did come and who asked a question. Y'all are awesome. I really love it when people are, asking really insightful questions and trying really hard to be engaged. I can really appreciate that. Awesome. Kathleen, I'm loving how much this is helping you. I'm loving your responses. This is awesome. Okay, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share and go ahead and stop the this webinar. Like I said, appreciate all of y'all, and I really do hope to work with some of you soon. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.